This one's going to be difficult, HB. We're dealing with a creature of immense power and a potentially limitless index of strength. The key is to focus on trying to calm him. His calming points have been sent to your hand terminal. He was summoned by Rasputin. Going full demon isn't something we recommend, for the more chaotic this gets, the more we are at risk for civilian casualties. Good luck.
Whoa. Look at that, huh? Okay, maybe not.
Welcome to the behind-the-scenes look at Hulk vs. Hellboy. This is going to be a basic introduction to Blender and all of its facets to make a skit such as this one. First, we're going to look at the base mesh sculpt. Right now, we're in sculpt mode. We're going to go over to the T panel, the tools panel, make sure symmetry is on. It is. We're going to go into the add modifier and select multi-resolution. From there, we're setting it to subdivide a few times. This will give us our subdivision detail. We're going to use the inflate brush to add additional detail to the muscles. We can bulk them up. What's great about the inflate brush is it allows you to add bulk while keeping fine details like creases and veins and so on and so forth. This character was downloaded from Daz3D. A link will be provided in the description. After adding additional bulk, we can now add some fine detail by going into the properties panel, making the texture selection, and then going to the brush texture selection within the properties panel. Make sure that we're selecting the proper texture and then add our image. The image can be made yourself. A lot can be found online, but we'll go over that later. From here, we're going to change the size of our brush. To do this, we press F on the keyboard. That will give us a larger radius, more surface area for more pores. Then we can change the size of the texture itself. This doesn't increase the texture, it duplicates it so we have an unlimited amount of pores, or at least it'll seem that way. We'll decrease the strength on the brush. Now, if we hold shift while doing our sculpting, it'll have a negative effect to what the sculpt normally does. If you click normally, it will have a positive effect and it'll produce the bumps which you're seeing now. Go ahead and switch over to our smoothing brush, and we're going to smooth out those new details so it looks more natural. We have a completed sculpt example of the Hulk character. I'm going to go ahead and up the subdivision levels to 5 so we can look at the muscle definition and veins and pores. Then I'm going to go ahead and decrease the subdivision levels back down to 2. Using the grab brush, I'm going to add some deformations in the chest and shoulder area, and then I'm going to go ahead and increase the subdivision levels, showing that when we apply base to the base mesh, all subdivision levels will see the changes we made in the lower subdivision. So now that we're up to subdivision level 5, and we move around the character, we can see the deformation changes made. Now let's move on to normal map baking. I'm going to click on the object, tab into edit mode, and then click on the mesh. From there, I'm going to select my material and press P to break the selection into 2 separate objects, torso and arms. The reason why I'm doing this is the normal space and the object space need to be the exact same for the texture map to bake correctly. Now I'm going to go into the UV image editor and create a texture. The texture is going to be our normal map for our torso. I'm going to set it to 4K and then set the color depth to 32-bit. From there I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to go then to our properties panel and click on the texture editor. From there I'm going to make sure I have the proper texture selected, and then I'm going to go to the Blender render settings. From there I can bake. When I click on bake, it's going to bake the material to the UV image texture space provided by the DAZ model. In other words, you don't have to unwrap your UVs whenever you download one of these models because they're already baked into the mesh themselves. Now that the normal map is baked, we'll need to save the file. When we save the file, we'll need to make note of the location because we'll need to call upon it when it's time to make materials. Which brings us to our next bit, materials. So materials are the renderer's way to emulate real-life surfaces within the Blender render itself. We're using Eevee for this demonstration, and I'm going to show you a few of the node builds that I have going for my Hulk character. So this right here is the normal map that we baked in the previous session. We also have a stressed normal map for whenever he's flexing. If we unplug the normal map node from the principled shader, you'll see that quite a few of the details disappear. If we plug it back in, the details reappear. This is how the normal map works and what it's used for. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about why we bake a normal map. Baking a normal map gives us a high poly representation baked into a map that we can place on our low poly character. The reason that you would want to do this is animation. If you were to try to animate our full poly sculpt that we did previously, it would bring your computer to a halt. Let's go ahead and unplug the color so we can take a look at the normal map in more detail. Now if we unplug the normal map, you'll see that the additional details the high poly sculpt gave us have now vanished. If we plug it back in, the details come back. Let's go ahead and plug the color back in so we can get a full representation of our Hulk's materials. Now let's go into this node group here. I built this node group to do hue correction because I didn't like the original colors on the image texture that I generated for this character. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the image itself, and as you can see, all it is the DAZ images that came with the model, and then I put a hue correction on it in Photoshop, and then came into Blender and hue corrected it more using my node group. So now I'm going to talk about the two normal maps. The normal map for the relaxed Hulk and the normal map for the stressed Hulk. This is a driver that controls the two, and that is our normal map, which goes into the normal socket of the principled shader. So this driver here is manipulated by these toggles that I've built. As we pull the toggles to the right, it shifts the control or the image projection onto the stressed normal map. If we're looking now, you can see that we have more veins and we have more muscle striation. This helps generate the look of flexed muscles. Now if we go back to the driver from the previous control, we can move the toggles over. You'll see that the veins are gone and that the muscle striations are gone as well, giving him a more relaxed look. This is all controlled by the driver in the two normal maps. So now that we know a little bit more about normal map creation and material creation, let's go ahead and take a look at the scene. So this is my scene rendered out in Eevee. We have car objects, building objects, the street itself is an object, the trees are all objects either I generated myself or I downloaded from the internet. So this right here, this building object, I'm going to click on one of the faces so we can take a look at the materials. If we scroll down here, we can get a preview of the material. You can see it's a brick texture. If we take a look at the node setup, we have the normal for the brick, we have the color for the brick, we have a mapping to tell the texture where to be on the actual object itself. And let's take a look at the images for my maps. This is the color map that we're using. So we can go ahead and get out of there. So this is my normal map node. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the texture. If we open that up, we can see that we have our brick normal here, which I also downloaded externally, and I'll provide links to that in a minute. So taking a look here, if we unplug the normal map, you'll see that the details disappear, and if we plug it back in, we get our brick texture back on the material. So let's take a look, or a further look, at some of the objects in the scene. This object I downloaded from a website. The website's called RGBase Planet. I also have links for that in the description as well. And if we take a look at this object, This object was also downloaded from Archibase Planet, and as you can see, that's a fully renderable model. I just had to provide the materials myself. So this object I also downloaded from archibaseplanet.com. I generated the materials myself. Let's go ahead and take a look at some free external PBR materials as well as models. So this is CC0 Textures. They have tons of PBR materials for both internal and external scenes. I also like to use textures.com. They also have a wide variety of PBR materials and just random decals and textures that you can use for any scene. They give you a 15 credit push per day, so you can come in here and do up to 15 credits free, and if you wanted to pay for premium, you could also do that as well. I also like to use, for my models, Archibase Planet. We can filter by building, vehicle, weapon, character. You can also contribute to this page as well. This is a great resource for tons of free models. Next, let's talk about generating a rig. To generate a rig, you'll need to go to Edit Preferences and enable the Rigify add-on. So go to Add-ons, type in RIG for Rigify, and you're going to check the checkbox for the Rigify add-on, and then save Preferences, and then exit the window. From there, you'll do a Shift A to add your rig object. Generally, you want to mesh in the scene before you try to rig it up, but I'm just showing you the functionality of the human meta rig. So you're going to tab into Edit Mode. From here, we can make all of our adjustments in order to match ourselves up to the rig. In order to make even matching, though, we'll need to go to the Properties panel and go to Options, and you're going to turn on the X Mirror. X Mirror for bone editing will allow you to match up any changes you make on the right-hand side to filter over to the left. Once you've manipulated your rig template inside of your mesh completely, you'll then need to go down to the Properties panel and click on Generate Rig. Once you've clicked that, it'll generate a secondary rig. Go ahead and click your template, and let's use G to move it out of the way. So G on your keyboard, and then move it out of the way. Once that's been done, we can take a look at our actual rig. So if we click on the rig, and then we go into Pose Mode, so the option for Pose Mode is at the top. If you click the down arrow, select Pose Mode, and we get the controls for the actual rig. Now these controls are used to manipulate the rig, which will in turn manipulate your mesh. So let's go ahead and take a look at the properties for this rig. If we scroll down here, we can take a look at our IK-FK blending. So let's move on to parenting the rig and weight painting. This was my template for the Hulk, my rig template. So as you can see, all the joints are manipulated inside the mesh. When I generated the rig, it generated the rig on the outside. Let's go ahead and go into object mode, and I'm going to go ahead and click on my template. I'm going to hide it, and then I'm going to click on my mesh, and I'm going to make it textured so we can see it better. Okay, now that that's been done, let's go ahead and secondary click, hold shift, and then click on the rig. From there, we'll press P to parent, and then you're going to want to do it with automatic weights. The reason we do this is because there's minimal amount of cleanup. Now, I've already done it for this rig, and I've already also done the cleanup. So let's take a look at the weight paint. I'm going to go into weight paint mode by pressing Shift Tab and then selecting weight paint. We can take a look, and you can see, I'm going to take a look at the bone groups here. So the bone groups are inside the rig. And then with each bone group we select, we have a weight paint value for each bone group. So as we're clicking through these, you can see the colors variate. The hotter the color, the heavier the weight. This matters whenever we're clicking items on our rig. Let's go ahead and move to the rig now. I'm going to press Shift Tab to go to Object Mode, and let's look at some rig functions. So if we click on this controller here, and then press R and then X, it'll rotate it on the X-axis. If we press X again, it'll rotate it on the X local axis. So let's click through and manipulate some of these controllers and see how they react. If we click on this one here and we click R twice, it'll put us in trackball mode. Trackball mode allows us to freely rotate while rotating the axis itself from a visible pivotal point on your screen. From here we can go into the In panel and take a look at our rig properties. This is the IK-FK blending I was referring to earlier. So this is our IK controller. Our IK controller is what's called an inverse kinematic controller. The inverse kinematic controller allows you to move the hand itself, and it'll adjust the elbow joint in the direction of the bend that you pull. So the IK controller is mainly good whenever you want to place your hand or your foot on a tabletop surface or a floor, a stationary object more or less. Let's go ahead and manipulate the foot controller now. So if we go down here and we click on the foot controller, it's in IK mode, so we're moving the knee by moving the foot joint. If we switch over to FK, we can then manipulate the knee by clicking on the shin and rotating, or clicking on the thigh. If we click both, We can then rotate them at the same time, moving the entire appendage. So let's go ahead and talk about animation now. With all rig objects selected, I'm going to press A to select all keyframes and then delete to delete them. Now I'm going to press I and then location rotation to put a keyframe on this frame for all rig objects. Now I'm going to click on the global control and press G and then press Y to move it in the Y axis, and then G and then Z to move it in the Z axis. But looking at this, I'm still on frame 1, and so I need to be on like frame 5 or frame 10, so I'm going to copy this position. And then I'm going to click on frame 10 and then Control V to paste the position of the global control. From here I'm going to press I and then O for location rotation on the global control, and then I'm going to click on the foot controller and I'm going to press Shift S in order to bring up the selection to move the cursor to selected. We do this so that we can snap the 3D cursor to the foot controller's location, move forward to the next keyframing event, and then snap the foot controller back to the 3D cursor using Shift S selection to cursor. Now I'm going to go through and make some minor adjustments and some movements in order to set up the next keyframing event. I'm going to pop in every now and again to let you know some of the things that I'm doing, as well as give you quick tips to help you during your animation process. As you can see, I'm doing the trackball method quite a bit. As I select the fingers here, I press R and then X twice to rotate them on their local X-axis. This is a quick way to make a fist. For now, it's just moment to moment trying to eyeball the next keyframing event. As I'm going through, I'm looking at the entire model. I'm trying to keep the next keyframing event in mind. What I'm going for is to have the elbow pulled all the way back, but in a natural type pose before he's getting ready to punch. I just put in a keyframe with a shortcut key of I and then O. I and then O more or less does a keyframe on every rig controller item selected in the location and rotation transforms. Now that I've keyframed those events, I'm trying to set up the next keyframing event. As you can see, I'm trying to straighten the arm out and rotate the body to present the punch. I'm going to continue to make minor adjustments to the rig. More or less what I'm trying to do is line up the next keyframed event. I want the mesh to look like it's in a natural pose. There I am doing the trackball rotation again. Notice when I click the fingers and then do a Control C, Control Shift V to copy the transforms to the other side of the mesh. I'm going to add some anger to the brows, as well as nostrils and upper lip. I'm about ready to keyframe. That looks good. I'm going to do an I and then O to keyframe everything. It looks like the wrist comes out a little too far whenever the punch occurs, so I'm going to fold that in a little bit. And then I'm going to keyframe it, I and O. Let's take another look. Looking much better. So that about does it for my behind the scenes look of Hulk vs. Hellboy. If you have any comments, be sure to leave them below, and always like and subscribe. And if you want to see something more in depth, let me know as well. I'll see what I can put together for y'all. Thanks.